and this is the Historic and Architectural Review Board meeting. I'm calling it now. The first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone would please stand. Our first order of business tonight is HARB 2017-16, 224 South Aberdeen Avenue, resubmitting for 2 changes to a previous HARB approval. We're looking at dormer details and front entry pent roof. If you'd like to go over some of the changes. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Janicek, and I'm the builder on the project here at 224 Aberdeen. And this project was in front of the board, I believe it was April 1st or the first week of April, in a prior submission that spoke to the change of a addition that was going to be added to the rear of the house, and then a change in the garage. In that prior submission, the garage doors faced Aberdeen, and in the prior submission, again in April, it showed a larger addition that you're seeing on the right with the garage doors facing the right side of the property. And in that submission, it presented the existing facade that you see here, which is 2 dormers, gabled dormers on the left, 2 gabled dormers on the right, and a gabled porch roof line at the main front entry. And I'm not sure, since I did not participate in the first submission in April that was approved, as to what emphasis was spent on the remaining 3 sides of the house. And that's what we're here for today, to look at the front facade as its relativity to the other 2 sides or 3 sides of the building. And once the construction got underway, and the property owners had an opportunity to visualize what they were getting. As we know, sometimes from a flat facade plan, it's not really easy to understand for the layperson. It became apparent to them that the front really did not match the new side and rear facades from an architectural style. And I'll take a moment just to flip the pages so you can see those additional side views. So in this plan, you'll notice the right side of the property, which has the garage, and you'll notice that there is board and batten siding. The overhangs are exaggerated with bracketry that's supporting the overhangs. You'll see a little shed roof above what is the mudroom entry to the right of the garage, and then you'll see a new master suite and kitchen addition to the right of the garage and entry. And then you'll see a little pergola structure that's on the rear. And so the materials that you see and the design that you see on this facade, I'd say primarily at the garage area, is more of what I'd say a craftsman, a little more casual style than the stone colonial style that we see on the front facade. And then when we look at the rear elevation, again, you'll see the sloping roofs, which I would not necessarily say they're shed roofs, but you'll see a sloping pent roof on the rear, a sloping shed roof on the right. And essentially, when we go back to the front facade, I'll put in front of you the current and the proposed. So the idea was merely that they wanted to bring the house to what their view is today's standards is a little more casual house, not as formal, something that speaks to a transitional design, which is going to take place on the interior of the house, which is a little combination of traditional and a little more modern amenity type lifestyle. And so the designers came up with, why don't we introduce roof lines at the dormers only. We're not changing the roof lines of the main house whatsoever, but the roof lines of the dormer that may be a little more complementary to what we're seeing in the remaining perimeter of the house. And the same thing with the front entry, and I apologize that rendering is a little fuzzy, but you'll notice that the main entry that also has changed from the gable to more of a sloping pitched roof. And the material on that pitched roof would be a metal roof as compared to an asphalt roof. One of the things that the flat renderings don't show, on the original house roof lines, the roof line comes down at a nice pitch, and at the very tail end there's a gentle swoop, which you can't see on this flat rendering. And so in the dormers, which again you wouldn't necessarily see, is same thing. They're coming down with a nice pitch and then a little swoop at the end. And really that was the reason for coming in front of you, is to really, in the view of the project, was to try to get the facades more complementary as compared to what is perceived as a little more formal front and more casual rear. And the other feeling was, as we walk through that particular area of Wayne, is that our perception is that we see a much larger preponderance of what I'll call craftsman style, and I may be wrong on that, not necessarily Victorian style, but I think we see some of that, and that this stone colonial style, just again, in certain people's view, didn't appear to be as appealing as they thought it could be with the proposed dormer and entryway changes. And that's what we have for you.
In the bottom drawing,
Mm-hmm.
the top part of that drawing, yeah, right where your fingers are,
Yep.
on what I guess would be your right side, those two windows, that's the garage?
So here,
Yeah,
yes.
that's the garage, okay.
Correct.
My packet didn't include all the drawings, so I'm just trying to make sense of what I'm looking at.
Sure.
To see this little swoop that you talk about
Yeah.
would be on this dormer
So
here.
where you would see that elevation would be more on the bottom left here, and rendering again in such small scale, it's very difficult to see that.
Mhm.
It's a very gentle swoop. On the site you can see it easily, but in these flat drawings it's difficult to pick that up.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. I toured this area on foot, and it seems to me that there are many gable-roofed dormers in the area, at least on the front of the property. I don't believe I saw one shed roof dormer in that immediate area in the front. I did see probably a couple gambrel roofed dormers in the front. And so my concern about this plan is that, number one, it's the front of the house. I know you've made an argument that there are certain elements you wanted to take from the other sides of the house. It seems to me that we do on a board, as far as visual impact, if we had to focus somewhere, it would probably be the front. Not so much in the rear or things that can't be seen from street view. So with that being said, looking at this from the front, I also have a concern about the symmetry of your plan. I think what was originally approved, there's symmetry with the front of the house, with the gables on the dormers, et cetera, the gable on the roof, et cetera. And also the majority of the surrounding properties. Your thoughts on some of my feelings in this regard?
I noticed, as I think you clearly mentioned, directly to the left of this house is a wonderful example of a house that has gone through several iterations of additions. And on that particular house, there are different varying roof lines other than gable roof lines. And I think you're correct. The one that comes to mind is, because you can't help but see it, is directly to the right, but it is on the side, a shed dormer that may have actually influenced a little bit of this design because it's right there. I know that there are some other shed dormers. There are gable, there are round turrets, there are gambrel. So I agree with you that there are quite a large variety of roof lines. Whether there is a preponderance of gables on the front, I can't speak to that because I haven't really looked closely, but I certainly am curious now that you mentioned that. So I think there is a varied amount of roof lines throughout that particular street in the remaining community. To your point of symmetry, the front facade with the shed dormers left and right are as symmetrical as the prior design. The only difference is we had two symmetrical dormers, two symmetrical dormers. Here we have shed dormer. So I think that that's symmetrical. I guess what you're referring to, Bob, is the primary gable. We lose the symmetry with the primary gable, but with many architectural styles, I'm sure you're aware of that, it's very common for a primary facade to have a very unique design that is different from left and right. We're doing a project in Radnor right now where the facade has limestone volutes side by side supporting a center dormer with a very steep sloped roof, maybe 12-16.
Is that in the historical district?
Is that our Drossen? Not a historical district. But my point is that we find some great varieties of facades that don't necessarily have symmetry. So to your point, bring that back to historical areas. I see a project that is pretty interesting over in the Oak Lane area, where we have some of these wonderful Victorian houses, but yet dotted in between, there's some houses that have gone through evolutions that have changed the facade. Not necessarily what maybe any of us would like, but it's a variety of design, and it speaks to people's personality and architectural styles and creativity. And so to your point of symmetry, I think that there is symmetry to the left and right. Do I feel that there is a variety of facades throughout historical districts? Yes, I do. But it's, you know, an opinion, and of course we all have different opinions on what may be appropriate or not appropriate. So I'm here to certainly hear and take your recommendations as to what you think is appropriate, if this is appropriate, or if there's something that you feel might look more appropriate. I'm open to hearing that.
I have a comment, I guess. The shed roofs, since there's nothing you're taking your cue from other houses in the near vicinity, and it is not common to see such things in any other of the houses in the historic district, which is really all we're concerned with.
Mm-hmm.
I respect that the bigger dormer is to get more interior space.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to just change the roof line to a gable so that it was sort of, you know, keep that sort of gable roof, just a bigger dormer?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that would be considered?
Physically, it's certainly capable, we're capable of doing that, but again, representing an owner's desire to have a more casual appearance, more of, again, as I call it, craftsman appearance that, in their opinion, speaks to a lot of the styles in the historic district. I would say that that would not necessarily meet what their goals were, simply because that's what they had, were gable dormers. So physically, yes, we could do that. Aesthetically, I think that's going back in the same direction of where they came from, which that it has more of a formal look, which is not really what they are hoping for.
So my understanding here, generally speaking, is as a board, I think we're very lenient on the sides and the backs of houses because you don't see them as much from the street, and we want to allow people to do, the renovations that they want with their homes. I sort of feel like in this situation, we were lenient with the homeowners and let them, pick the design choices that they wanted to on the sides and the backs. And perhaps they made a bad decision, and now they're coming back trying to fix it. I'd like to point out that we are, as per our ordinance, supposed to be preserving the architectural details of the building, including the roof lines, preserving the roof shapes specifically. That's its own line item of something that we're supposed to be working to do, and making every attempt, if making any additions, to retain the architectural details. So based on what I have, as my position on the board and the ordinance that I am supposed to be upholding, I don't think that changing the roof lines and the gables based on the additions that were allowed on the side and back of this particular house is really the right thing for this board to do. My opinion, of course, we'll put it to a vote, but that's where I stand on this. You guys have any comments?
Well, I'm okay with it. I'm quite frankly. I'm all right with the design. I can say it, but I'm sure everyone here heard it. I'm okay with this.
Okay. Turn it off then.
I'm not.
Turn off your mic if you're done speaking. Thank you.
So if I may, what would the board like to see? Sarah, I think you mentioned that it's not necessarily the additional space, it's more of the roof line. And I think I'm hearing a consensus that the change of the roof line is going against, Janelle, exactly what you read.
Yeah.
So I hear you on that. If we could take a moment and go to the entryway, would that stand the same with the entryway gable versus the almost what I'll call a bell shape? So it's a slope in 3 different directions. So it's the same thing with the front porch. You'd prefer that as a gable?
I would also just like to share with my fellow board members that when this case was first decided, it was the board before us with the frontal changes with the dormers, just so that, in case you might not be aware of that. So what they're presenting from the old was approved by a former board.
I am not a design person, so I will not remark on what maybe could be done in this situation. I will leave that to others. I'm not an architect, not a designer, so you don't
Okay.
want to know my opinions of that. But are there any other comments from the board? And we don't have any public, so I would offer comment by the public, but.
Is there some approach that maybe allows us to get to support both approaches? The ordinance approaches, if you will, or the HARB standard approaches, which I heard very clearly, and what the owner's desires are. Is there some way that we could bridge both approaches? And is that maybe that the entryway is gable, which matches the gable on the main house, and that the dormers have that shed approach left and right? So now it's a combination where we maintain the original gable at the front entry, but yet there's the approach of doing a midway where, okay, you got to do that. You can't put in the bell curve, but you've got to stay with the gable in the front entry, but that the shed dormers may be okay, or some derivative thereof.
I'd like to just share with my fellow board members too. When I saw this house, work's already begun on constructing the shed dormers. And I had talked to Mark, before this meeting about that, and I thought, wow. Because in my opinion, if we as a board, are looking more to do another type of thing to keep, the synergy, whatever, this could be more costly for the homeowner. So there was a disconnect somewhere. Just wanted to share with you all that maybe, in the future, we won't have that. At least I shared that with Mark. So hopefully when he becomes before us again, that will be understood not to do. But the construction has already begun on the shed dormers for this house.
I want to say that the field staff were very prompt in bringing this to our attention. Unfortunately, the lag period between getting on the schedule and submitting has taken us, X weeks, a month perhaps, to get in front of you. So as you can imagine, you can't necessarily keep a building open to the elements for a month period of time. But the field, Radnor staff, the inspectors were very prompt in saying, hey guys, that's a change to the original plan. You've got to get that in front of the board. And certainly the field staff can't make any kind of recommendations, which brings us here today where we are.
And who was responsible for beginning construction before, who was responsible for beginning construction before the design was approved?
Well, the original design was approved, and as you may know that customers don't necessarily have, the layperson, I should say, doesn't necessarily have the vision to understand what a flat facade means. So once they see things in real life and they see scale in real life and they see proportions in real life, then they're like, boy, that's not exactly what I thought it looked like on paper. And it's wonderful when we have projects that have the ability to have models built, but that's such a rarity that there's a model that's built that a layperson understands proportions and scale. So when the consumer or customer asks about what's the possibilities, and that goes to an architect, the architect says, well, here's a possibility, what do you think? And the owner says, oh, I love that, let's do that. So that falls back to the builder. Can
That's
we do
you?
this? Yes.
And that's you, okay.
And quite frankly, if it wasn't for the staff, again, the Radnor field staff bringing it to our attention, we would not have known that a change to the dormer, which is a relatively modest change from a building perspective.
But it's not particularly modest from a design perspective. And here is my question then. Can the original design be put back?
I think that anything could be put back.
Well, I'm sorry for the homeowner because it is an expense, but we as a board are charged with what we are charged with, and we'll be happy to review the ordinance with you if you like. I'm not trying to be confrontive or unfriendly. It's just that the excuse that it's already under construction is not one that holds much water with us, because we have a responsibility to the township and to the historical district and to the other residents of that historical district to maintain some kind of a quality of appearance. That's what we're here for.
Right.
I think that the shed dormer roof, as I said before, if it's not anywhere else in the historical district and no cue was really taken from anybody else's facade, I'm not casting a particularly friendly eye towards it just because it's going to stick out, and that's not what we really want to approve.
Well, Bob, you had walked the area, and I honestly did not. I certainly will do that.
I would suggest you do, because for me, as I was walking around that area, the first thought that I had after seeing the other houses there, because again, the gables on a lot of these houses are so prominent, whether it's, a gabled dormer or the big gable in front, or the few of the gambrel roofed dormers. It's striking. And, when I saw with the construction that was going on, it gave me some sense of what the scale is going to be like here. My feeling was it doesn't fit.
So I posed the question back as I did earlier. What are the possibilities? So is a gambrel roof a possibility? And certainly we have to take this back to our owners. It's their choice ultimately.
I thought, again, just because of the prominence of the gabled dormered, roofed dormers, I thought, maybe a gambrel would work there, because I think that there's at least 2 other houses on that street that have those. And I think it would break up some of the uniformity, because even though that's all there and very prominent, some of it, it's a little bit too uniform when looking at it as a whole. So if you wanted to do something that was non-uniform, a little more creative, maybe that gambrel roof dormer in the front would work. You got to walk that side of the street, like right across the street. Not having the exact location, but if you find it, you'll see. And some of those were very exquisite.
Well, it might be quite exciting, and it might look fabulous. So as I said, that's our purpose of this meeting, is finding out what creative solutions, and in fact, if a gambrel roof may look more appropriate, and I certainly like the lines of a gambrel roof. And I think that the goal was to change, as they call it, formality, and maybe that's not an appropriate word, but if the board would consider a gambrel. And is there any other items, Sarah, do you have any?
I think we could offer you the opportunity to come back next month. We'll call this a continuance, so you wouldn't have to pay again. I think what I'd like to motion is that we offer you a continuance to change the roof line, walk the district with your customers, and see what other people have that might fit with them. Come back before us with something that reflects the neighborhood, and I think you will find us very friendly towards it.
I'm certainly
And especially
open to that.
focused on the front
Yeah.
and
okay.
what's visible from the street.
So if we may, while we're having this discussion, what's the position of the siding? So we've been focused on the roofing. What is your position on the siding? Which in this rendering, again, I apologize for what appears pretty fuzzy on the screen, but that's a board and bat proposed siding, which again is picked up on the sides and rear, and I've heard you clearly that the side and rear has less of an importance. But is that something, I wouldn't want us to come forth in 30 days with a roof line that year, this is great, and then, well, what about this siding now? So I'd like to make sure that when we come back to you, we've really addressed all of the elements that are important to the historic ordinances.
Because the street itself, I used to lecture on Victorian architecture and early 20th century architecture. And if ever there were a street that was a transitional street between the two, the perfect street. And the Victorian period felt that additive ornament, they stuck little Victorian Palladian windows and slapdash. I think that in this particular case, you can't try to match the house next door. There are too many varied styles on that street. You can't try to be the colonial style next door or the Victorian style 2 doors up.
Agree.
I think it's asking too much. What we can ask or hope for is that it has a very decent appearance. This, to me, appears to be a decent appearance, and I think that we are overstretching by requiring that we match the house next door. It's not realistic. There are too many varied architectural styles. It's incredible how many styles there are in a 3-block stretch.
Yeah. Well, I agree with what you're saying. And when we look at the approach from a craftsman standpoint, as you very well know better than I do, in the old historic days of building prior to my career, the builders were the architects and the owners and the designers and the craftsmen. And these wonderful styles that we see were their interpretations of what they believed was a wonderful
Absolutely.
style. And just as you mentioned, they did a little of this, a little of that. And I think that is what we love in the architecture that we see in this area, because they are unique individually. And so I look at myself as a master craftsman builder, and I quite frankly enjoy being a craftsman designer and taking this property and appealing to exactly, Terry, what you said. So I'm 100% on board with you. And though I am the builder, I'm not the architect, there is some pride in our work, and having the ability to show our flair in design with input from the architect and the owner is a very fulfilling thing. And I think it speaks to, so when we're talking about history, what is Mark the Builder trying to do here? Is he being ignorant of design and ignorant of ordinance and ignorant of a historic society? Quite frankly, it's the complete opposite. It's one that is very sensitive to historical design. You may not know, but certainly some staff members know that I was an extreme proponent on the saving of the Willows Cottage, which is a whole other discussion, maybe a sore subject. But I'm a resident here of Radnor Township. I live in a house in Banjo Town, which you probably know where that is. Very historic house. So I'm a big proponent of architecture. I'm a big proponent of historic areas. I'm a big proponent in saving old structures, but I'm also a big proponent of artistry and craftsmanship. And I think that I was excited about this because it speaks to everything that you, Terry, mentioned. So, but at the same token, I am a builder in this community, and I want to follow ordinances, and that's what we're here for. So I'm not going to...
So if that's true, first of all, next time, don't start building before you come before the historic board if you know that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, bring us pictures.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have a picture of the front of the house. We don't have a picture of where you're taking this inspiration from. So you've said 100 times in this conversation how difficult it is to see things flat, yet you only presented things that were flat.
Right.
And I assume it's because you already started building and you didn't want that to come to the surface.
No, that's not true.
But I don't know.
In the last submittal, there were I believe a grouping or a set of photographs, and I referenced the original April 1st, I think it was.
We don't
approval.
have records of
But
that.
That's fine.
We don't
It's-
have that in front of us anymore.
It's very easy for me
So.
to provide those photographs.
So at this time, I think you offered to grant them a
I
continuance.
will once again offer you a continuance. Won't cost you anything else, just a little delay, and I'm sorry for your owners. Reconsider the design of the gate, of the dormer.
Mhm.
Bring us photographs, photographic evidence to show why you do what you do. Bring us current photographs of the house and of any other houses in the neighborhood that you're taking your cues from. I think at this point, I'm not prepared to support it because there's really not enough information for me to make an informed decision.
Sure.
So that's, my motion is that we offer a continuance till next month.
And again, just for clarity, I'm very clearly understanding your request of what deliverables we should be bringing with us and to look at the roof lines. And I go back to siding. Is the siding acceptable? Because obviously a gambrel roof is limited to the hat on top. And I want to make sure that I'm very well prepared so that it allows you to evaluate in a very clear, concise approach. And I would ask the board to consider my last dissertation about I am a craftsman who takes great pride in this community, and I think that it would be wonderful for the board to allow someone like myself to in fact show his craftsmanship abilities. It's a legacy for me. I'm in this township. My son is anticipating taking over my business, and I think there's nothing greater than to have that legacy where he could look back and say, hey, there's one of my dad's projects. So to that end, I appreciate the board reviewing and sharing your feedback. I do consider it to be positive feedback. I don't consider it to be negative feedback. It's good feedback for me. And so I will come back in the approximate 30 days, and I'll make sure that we have more photographs and a little more historical data, and look forward to your comments at that meeting.
Quick question, do we have to motion to grant a continuance, or can we just offer that to them? Okay.
Okay, well, I make that motion.
Before the motion goes, just like to go and share with you, Mark, that with Terry's comment, the whole question of uniformity as opposed to individuality in design, I get that. But again, just walking through there, the prominence of all those gables, I think needs to speak to something in this design. Where I see the conflict, if you will, between like uniformity in an architectural design and an individual craftsman perspective is illustrated quite clearly if you ever troop around the Rittenhouse Square area of Philadelphia.
Yep.
To the untrained eye, all those brownstones look quite uniform. But what I've learned to appreciate over the years, and I most revisited it because we moved into a new office tower not too far away, so it's very convenient for me to bop down there, is how each and every one of those has their own individual character. Yes, there are all these brownstones, but they each have their individual character, whether that be the ironwork, whether that be how windows are placed, what type of front it has with materials, et cetera. So I wanted to share that, to speak to what Terry brought up, because I think that whole area kind of illustrates that point that, yes, I think the uniformity is important as far as architectural styles in the historic district, and also the need for certain individuality. And I think that's all best illustrated if you're ever do go down there is in the Rittenhouse Square area.
We do a tremendous amount of work in Philadelphia. We just finished the most historic property on Rittenhouse Square, 1830 Rittenhouse Square. So you're probably familiar with that building, and you're probably familiar with the facade and the prominence, and again, the individuality. So thank you. Well, once again, I'm agreeing with all of your comments, and yeah.
Does anyone second the motion?
I second.
All those in favor?
I'd accept it now, you know that.
Okay. So three are in favor of granting the continuance, so the continuance will be granted. At this point, I think you have some information to go back with.
Great.
And we'll move on to our next order of business.
Great. Thank
See
you. It
you
was
in
a pleasure
October.
hearing your feedback, and I look forward to visiting with you again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll move on to our old business. There is a report on the new HARB ordinance, as I understand.
Yes, I am sorry that it was unable to be reported last month. There was a technological glitch, and the document didn't come through. So here I am to give the report myself. Okay, in regards to updating the HARB ordinance, all 7 commissioners were interviewed during the month of July. Miles Kellum assisted with the interview with Commissioner Higgins. Terry Arney assisted with Commissioner Schaefer. Bob Mordeshko assisted with Commissioner Clark, and I want to thank you very much for your help with that. I interviewed Commissioners Curley and Booker by phone, and I interviewed Commissioners Nagel and Orr by myself. So after a review of all the responses, here's some issues where there's agreement and some places where there's divergence. All of them agree that the historical properties and historical districts of Radnor Township are an asset. They keep property values high, make our community unique. This was something that pretty much everybody said. All feel it's important to include scattered sites in the ordinance, but there isn't any particular agreement on how this should work. Although they all agree that the ordinance needs an update, they don't want to participate in the process. They want us to do it and give them something to consider. And there's a modest degree of urgency that we do it while this current board is empaneled, rather than waiting till after January. So there is an urgency to do it, to get it done in December. So I want to now go through the things where the big issues that we've all been talking about as a group and what their positions are on that. Most of them support detached garages on the grounds that it's unlikely a house at that time would have had an attached stable or garage. Some felt that they don't want to impede development, and if an attached garage can't be seen, there's no reason to deny an application. As for massing, all believe it's important, but there's no agreement. There's no suggestions on how to go about discussing it even. An idea was floated to develop a calculation, but whatever is developed will require legal review so as not to appear arbitrary and capricious. Right now, whatever we want to call massing is our and the commissioner's call, but they'd like the issue to be addressed in such a way that it is unlikely that the board would get sued if they made a decision based on massing. So there needs to be some kind of they want us to address it. Everybody was actually very urgent that we address massing. It means different things to different people, but they all want something in there. So that'll require a little bit of research. They all agreed that we should comment on design of the windows and the look of roofing and siding materials for houses in the historic districts. This would actually require a change in the building permit and application process to make sure all of those projects come before us, which they do not now. If somebody just wants to change their windows, they have to get a building permit, but they don't have to come before us. If that's all they're doing, they do not have to come before us. So that would require a change of ordinance to make sure that we approve the design of the window and make sure that even if it's a modern window, it looks historically correct, which is certainly possible in today's window manufacturing world. It just needs to make sure that the design, that we approve we as a board approve the design of window and siding. Community notice, and I know that this is very near and dear to your heart, Bob, so I want to let you know that they were all okay with it. Some preferred lawn signs, some preferred lawn signs and a mailing, some preferred a notice in the window, but those few that did prefer the notice in the window would also be okay with a lawn sign. So they all agreed that notice is important and they would be willing to support lawn signs. But again, they're not going to accept it as a piecemeal amendment to the ordinance, and they want that to be as part of the package to the updates. So I'm sorry, Bob, but you're going to have to wait for the whole ordinance to go in, but I think by the first of the year, you'll get those lawn signs. That was the reason that they didn't take any action on the resolution that we sent up I guess it was in the spring. But it wasn't ignored, and it actually started the discussion of a broader need to revise the whole ordinance. So we'll need to submit another resolution at a certain point to get funds to design and produce the signs, and that will require a discussion with staff, and they know that we're going to come to talk to them to define what additional work activities would be required and what fees are appropriate and whether the sign should be sold or rented. And we can't put this into the ordinance until we know what the process will be, what the policies will be, and the costs. So once we have all that in place, we can put the language that makes that possible into the ordinance. But that requires a little bit of discussion at the staff level to see what would be the easiest and the least expensive. The thought was that it would be a sign that could be reused that would just advise passersby that the property is going to be considered by the HARB and that they should visit the website, where Ray is always quick to tell us that anything that any citizen wants to know is on the website. So that's the kind of sign that could be reused. Now we get into the question of, should somebody leave a deposit and bring it back, since it will be sort of, it could be used again. It will be generic and could be used again. So do we want to rent it for a fee and then give them back their fee, or do we just want to sell it to them? So that's something that we really have to discuss. They also all agreed that the HARB should review all new construction in historic districts. So if there is a very determined person who wants to tear down a non-conforming house and build something else, even though they're tearing down a non-conforming house, if it's in the historic district, we should be reviewing it. So that's something that will need to go in the ordinance, and that is probably going to also be a change to the application form. So we have to figure out what's involved in the logistics with that. As for the purpose of the HARB, most agreed that we serve to preserve and protect historic properties, but what that actually means depends. The HARB right now reviews design and refers anything that we do to the commissioners for action, and that's a process that they all support. They also believe that we as a board have a duty to educate applicants, and an educational program in general was suggested, but there wasn't any kind of logistical advice on that one either. And it wasn't clear if the township commissioners would approve funds to design, promote, and carry out a program, and there were further no thoughts about what entity should actually do that education, whatever form it takes. So there's going to be some additional discussion about that. So that's pretty much a summary, but I have a few comments that were made that I felt that was worth to bring to you. We must be mindful that developers and their attorneys can be litigious, and any changes we make must be legally defensible. The township solicitor, Mr. Rice, is that his name? Mr. Rice. Miles and I met with him just to talk about what he can do for us. And he is on retainer with the township, so anything that we want him to review, it won't cost us or the taxpayers any additional to have him review what we plan to make sure that it is legally defensible, because we have to be aware of that. The Willows, the next comment is that the Willows is one site outside of the formal historical districts that's important to the commissioners. They all feel very strongly about it, and this is my comment, that perhaps as a test case, we could consider making the Willows property its own historic district, just as a way of making sure that whatever work gets done to any of the properties on the Willows property would have to come to us for review, which right now it doesn't. So that might be something that we as a board would like to consider. The next thing is that the HARB doesn't have the expertise that's needed, and that was voiced by pretty much everyone. They were all lamenting that there's no person in the building trades that sits on this board, and there's no architect that sits on this board. And so I actually do have a resolution that I've drafted, and I'll give to you, Mary Ann, that I'll make at the end of this report, to ask the commissioners to advertise for an architect and someone in the building trades that's a resident, a voting resident. It's not that they conduct their business here, they have to live here and vote here to serve on our board with us. The full complement of this board should be 7. And I don't believe, after I was invited to join it, that there was any further effort made to invite others to join. And I think it behooves us to request that they advertise for such things, because I don't think it's our responsibility to advertise, it's theirs. That's just my comment. There's a sensitivity to any process change that will involve staff time. And a request was submitted to the township manager, but so far I haven't heard back, for a meeting so that Miles and I, as the ordinance subcommittee, can assess how any potential new procedures will modify staff activities, and to that extent, what additional staff costs might be added. As I said, there was a great sensitivity to how much more work we would be asking the staff to do. From my read, it's not much, but just because I sit up here and say not much doesn't mean that the people who actually have to do it will view it as not much. So we want to make sure that anything that we want to do can be commented on and addressed by the staff before we actually ask for them to do it. Again, the commissioners want to have something to vote on by December. They don't want any official dialogue. They would rather vote on something up or down rather than in bits and pieces. It's pretty much agreed that the ordinance doesn't need wholesale rewriting. They're looking for strategic additions to strengthen the language. And Beverly Barnes from Delaware County will be available to help us craft language once we know what we want to include. So the next steps are to meet with township staff and to put together a working group, hopefully to convene in early October to address what education means, talk about lawn signs. Hopefully by then we'll be able to talk to staff and see what we need. And that concludes my report on the ordinance update subcommittee activities. I would like to conclude with this ordinance that I have, this resolution that I have crafted, and it says, whereas the Radnor Township Historical Architectural Review Board ordinance allows for 7 members, and whereas there are currently only 5 members of the HARB, and whereas the makeup of those members as listed in the HARB ordinance specifies that there be at least 1 architect and 1 building inspection professional, and whereas the current makeup of the HARB does not include such members at this time, and whereas the expertise of these professionals is generally considered by the Board of Commissioners to be important and highly valuable, and whereas vacancies and opportunities for citizens to serve on township boards is customarily advertised in publications mailed and otherwise made generally available to residents of Radnor Township, now therefore be it resolved that the HARB hereby requests that the Board of Commissioners take action to advertise such vacancies in pertinent township publications in order to make these open positions known to the community. Resolved this day, September 6, 2017, at the HARB's monthly meeting. And
Quick comment. Where did you get 7 members?
that's what they told us. Is it not in the ordinance?
It's not in the ordinance, it's 5.
Oh.
But it does require that 1 be a registered architect or engineer and 1 be a person with technical knowledge in the
Okay.
building code.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it said 7.
So the fact that we're a board of 5, right? Yeah, but
We can have up to 7.
I don't know. It consists of 5 members, but how did it come to be that we don't have an architect or an building person, right? Are you guys architects we don't know about? Is that a lack of interest in the community that we ended up with these 5? Does anybody have any insight on that? I just don't know.
When board positions come due, the township secretary and township manager advertise for persons. I'm not, and I got to be very careful here, I'm not exactly sure that either the township secretary or the manager actually read the ordinance and understood that we needed technical people. My opinion only, and hopefully I'll be here at the next meeting.
Do we know when, I know a lot of people on this board are new, but I don't know that they started off with full 5-year terms. I feel like I'm one of the people that was filling in for someone that had to resign early.
Yes.
Do we have any turnover happening soon that we could put someone?
We do not, unfortunately, and I think I've made the comment to you that we had an issue or a time frame issue where it seemed like we had a wholesale board change. And that's never good because there's a learning curve and also to the people to fill the positions. I don't think there's anybody on for or off for at least 2 years yet.
But we can have.
At least that, because I do know I can always, for myself and Miles, we were appointed at the same time, and that was for a 5-year term.
Right, yeah, I have 4 more years on mine, but
Right.
we can have up to 7. At least that's what the commissioners explained to me, that we can have up to 7. It's not limited to 5.
Does that include any type of like consultant type work, like Lower Merion has?
No, Lower Marion's board is way much bigger than ours.
But they also have consultants.
They do,
Yeah.
they do, but their board, I think, is probably 10 or 12 actual members of their board, and then they bring in additional people as necessary.
My concern is with the two professionals. I know that the former chair, because I had met him in another meeting here, he presented before us. Cam, I think,
Cam,
you know him, Janelle. He had like a tenure of 10 years. I mean, what's the whole process in like going about recruiting an architect?
Well, I mean, as we were all recruited, they just advertised in the township publications, you know, looking for interested citizens willing to serve. But it didn't say looking for interested architects willing to serve or looking for interested building professionals willing to serve. It just said interested citizens. And I think that if they specifically reach out to, you know, say that they're reaching out to the architectural community, I know that there are certain architects with offices at Radnor that don't live here. So we don't know if there are any architects that practice somewhere else that may live here. So that's the opportunity to at least let it be known that we're looking for additional expertise.
Also,
Well-
they should look into like certain associations for this. I'm thinking in like a Penn School design.
Well, I think that there's a limit to what can be done, since it's not our individual responsibility to do that. It's the commissioner's responsibility to fill these board positions. The resolution that I have is to ask them to do it. We don't have to vote on it today, but I think that's
I
the
don't see
best
anything
way.
in here that says that we can be 7. I mean, I think that could be something we, you know, draft for them to approve at some point, but I don't see anything. I mean, other boards have, oh, I just saw one. They have like roving members or like alternates or advisory panels. I'm not sure what they're calling all of them, but they have other people that are not the board that are in some sort of advisory capacity,
Well,
is
we
my
can
understanding. So maybe we
certainly,
could,
I didn't bring that up in any of my questions, but, you know, it would maybe make sense, but the person still had to have an advisor, but the person still has to be a resident and voting citizen of Radnor Township, not
Right.
just a business person.
right, so my concern moving forward with updating the ordinance is, do we have the power to do so if we're not a board as per the ordinance? Because it specifically states we need these two.
I think
Members.
I think they're de facto granting us the power. Seriously, I mean, Miles and I have been tasked with taking it forward, and they lament that we're not the professionals that they wish us to be, but they accept that we're here, and here we are. We've all been sworn in, and we're all members.
I think the important thing to consider too is that, you know, professionals aren't the end all and be all. You know, there's something called trained in capacity, for example. But beyond that, I want to bring up the issue of community education. I think it's going to be more and more important. Prior to this meeting, I just clarified a couple of things for our last presenter, which he wasn't aware of. So before this meeting, I poked around, you know, what other townships are doing, you know, on the internet, nothing too much in depth or tiresome. But as far as what we do as a board, more or less, it seems like it's all over the place. I mean, there's a local community organization of homeowners, for example, just for homeowners of, I think it's called Hershey's Mill. And they have a committee that does architectural review. That's one part of the spectrum. But obviously, you know, it's just all suggestion. There's no enforceability to it, but hey, they do architectural review for their community. Beyond that, I saw one historical commission, Chestertown, Maryland Historical Commission. okay, Chestertown is colonial town, much older than Wayne. And when I was piecing through their website, and I thought maybe we could start here on community education, because I was impressed with their website. And a lot of how they operate and the tools they have there for the community, even to how they vote. The 3 different things they can vote on: recommend, not recommend, deny. Very clearly done, very nicely done. What they do, what they don't do. I think if we maybe needed some kind of template to get this going on the community education end, apart from community notification with the sign, I think it might be a good place to go. I think as far as, cost and effort, wouldn't be too deep in that way. So if you ever have a moment, please do check out their website, because I was impressed with it. Chestertown, Maryland Historical Commission.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm not going to put forth this resolution if everybody agrees that it's not the right thing to do at this time. But I do say to you that in all of the interviews that I had with the commissioners, all of them individually lamented that the expertise that they feel is valuable is no longer present on this board.
One last final thought. I just wanted to say thank you, Sarah, for all your work and you've done on this, and Miles. Can you send us a copy via email?
Sure, I will try again.
Okay.
I did send it out, but what came through was not what I
You got to use the Pony Express. It's the 21st century.
Maybe Mary Ann can fire up the copier before we all go home. Yes, I'll be happy to get you a copy. So the rest of this month, I'll be working with Miles to see who we feel would be reasonably willing to serve on the board, on the steering committee, and then we can really get down to nuts and bolts about the things that were recommended to be changed. So I'll have a further report for you in October.
All right, so at this point in time, we open up the floor to public participation. Anything you would like to bring up to the meeting?
Hello, everybody. Mark Janasek. I enjoyed the conversation, or listening to the challenges of the board. It is pretty interesting that the board does not, do I understand, have an architect?
Yeah.
Puts you in a very difficult position to, I wonder, do you know what a gambrel roof is? Okay, good. Well, then you know enough.
I've done a lot of reading on architecture. Actually, I'm thinking about being maybe possibly an amateur one.
Yeah,
We're
well,
not uninformed, we're just not certified.
my wife tells
Yeah,
me.
we're not,
certifiable.
we're not a professional architect, but I, at least, speaking for myself, to prepare for this board, I read a lot. Especially what helped me was, the books of Witold Rybczynski. He was a professor of architecture at Penn, and his book's The Most Beautiful Home, Most Beautiful House in the World, etc., really gives a good perspective for the laity, and it's really helped me. And I'm surprised at so much of his work, because I've also been piecing together a little library, like things like on windows, and how much he appears in these, various coffee table type books. But anytime I see his name there, I know that at least I'm on target with that. More so, I've brought myself up to speed on geometry. We had a case, trapezoid. Okay, a trapezoid, it's non-uniform space, right? Those kinds of things. But I think, all of us have done somewhat that or the other.
So if I may, contribute to some of the discussion that you had. As a builder in this community, I'm a Radnor resident, I'm a voting resident of I've lived here for many, many years. My children are graduates of Radnor school districts. And something that you might find of interest as a builder, Harb has this aura over it that they're very difficult, that we have to go through Harb, that's going to be a problem. And it speaks to your points a little bit about education. I don't ever perceive Harb to be difficult. The challenge is that we as builders, and in some cases as architects, we don't know what the perception is or what the interpretation is of the ordinances. So in my experience earlier today, I was trying to probe exactly what it is that you were looking for, and you very clearly read the ordinance, but that ordinance is so open to interpretation that it makes it very difficult.
It's very broad.
Yeah, so from a building professional or an architect, that's where that is, oh, they're so difficult because I don't know why. I don't find you to be difficult at all. I find you to be succinct in what it is that you're supposedly doing here, but there is a level of education that is missing, and how you get that education is, I don't believe that Harb and some of the other departments are difficult at all. It's just understanding what the process is, getting that information to us so that we clearly can follow the guidelines. One of the things that you, Sarah, were reading earlier about garages. So I heard you specifically talking about a detached garage, or I'm sorry, an attached garage. But I didn't hear you talk about detached garages in the historic district.
The comment from the commissioners, I was just reporting on the interviews that I did with the commissioners, and it's generally agreed that for historic houses, if the building, any outbuilding, especially one connected with horses or cars, would not have been attached if it had been there when the house was built. That was the comment. So I think that the general feeling is that the garage can be seen. They prefer to see it detached. If it cannot be seen, then most of them don't really care if it's attached. If it's tucked away behind the house and it can't be seen from the street, then they are going to look kindly on it. One of the things that we need to make clear is that we're just an advisory board. We recommend to the commissioners. So at a certain point, when we all agree that the design you present is something that we're willing to give to them, it goes to them with our approval of appropriateness, but they also get text of our discussion. So they know what our comments are, and but they make the decision. So we're just an advisory board.
Is there the opportunity for builders to bring projects in front of you in an informal way? So I have a very specific question for you. I have another project that is in the historic district that is in design right now.
At this time, no, not without a fee. Lower Merion actually offers that opportunity for collaboration, but right now, the ordinance and the process that the commissioners have approved does not permit that.
So what is that fee? Is it an application submission fee? Okay.
Yeah, well, I think that we can literally continue you indefinitely.
Well, I'm talking about a whole different project.
But I mean, you
so-
pay once and then
Right.
then
So-
you can come before us, but you can't come before us without paying the fee, I'm sad
Okay.
to say.
So this ties in a little bit to your points here. So I'm a builder, I'm a resident, and I have some very specific questions that you're not clear on. Well, just as I wasn't clear in my presentation earlier, I wish I was clear, just as you wish. So I could ask you some very specific questions, and I'm implying some of them now, and you don't know the answer. Well, that happens. That's the nature. We're not all in tune in every single rule and ordinance. But I go back to this so we're talking about how can you improve the Harb board? How can you get more people on the board? How can you get builders and developers to not feel that Harb is difficult? And I'm sure none of you feel that your position should be strained, stressed, or difficult for a builder or a homeowner. It shouldn't be that way. I embrace historic architecture, but yet I'm a builder of new homes as well. So back to my point, I have another project completely independent of what we were talking about earlier today that is absolutely in the historic district, that is under design right now, and this was an eye-opener to me. because I could see that this project will be presented to you in a month or 2 months. I'm not sure when we're going to have it ready, but in the next month to 2 months. And I could see you raising very similar points as you did today, but yet, well, that's counterproductive for us. It would be wonderful if I could present that while we're early in the design stage, which you referenced in our project. Why don't we bring these things to you when it's in the design stage? Well, we don't really have an opportunity if there's not an informal review. So we're going down the path right now of a design of a historical house that we believe may meet ordinance, but maybe not. So I would love next month when I'm here presenting on 224 Aberdeen, present this new project to you. I would like to get feedback from you even before, because 30 days is a long way off. And then in 30 days from now, you may grant a continuance, and then it's another 30 days off. Wow, 60 days away to not even have an answer. If I get a continuance from there, then another 90 days, which for me as a builder, it's okay. You know, we have plenty of work. Whether I start that project in 30 days or 120 days is okay with me, but it's not okay to your community members who want to move forward with the project.
Well, we certainly do have to balance all of those
Right.
interests, and I certainly respect that. As a homeowner, if somebody doesn't really want to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, that's not what, and it's not what we're about. It's not what the commissioners are about. They don't want to be an impediment to development.
Right.
But the notion of the HARB is that they want to maintain the visual integrity of these historic districts because they're important to the community. They keep people wanting to move in. And in a certain case, if somebody wants to make a lot of changes and it's just not going to blend in with the neighborhood, you know, maybe they shouldn't be living in a historic district.
Right. Sure.
But I think if you're going to be building in our historic districts and getting more business, you certainly will come to understand what we're looking for. And truthfully, it's not that complicated. We just, you know, that old Sesame Street game, one of these things is not like the other, is not what we want to be doing here. We want to maintain visual integrity. Yes, it has differences. Each house is different, of course. Nothing is identical. That's one of the beauties of it. But it kind of has to look like it belongs.
Right.
And that's something that you can take forward. It will take you, you know, charge your client, walk around the neighborhood, see what other houses look like. And then you can go to them and your architect with an informed mind of this is what we need to do, and this is what they'll never approve because it's a spaceship in the middle of a historic district.
Sure.
I would also maybe recommend, you mentioned more than once about putting your mark on the neighborhood and for your children to see what you've done. I would perhaps approach it differently. There is an architect that has already made his mark on this neighborhood. And if you look at a historic district and a project as how can I either accentuate what this architect did or help preserve what this architect did, that's what we're looking for. So I feel that we're very lenient when it comes to areas of houses you don't really see. But when you're dealing with the straight on front of a beautiful house that is in a historic district, you know, it's going to be very difficult for us to say, yes, change it into a completely different style. You know, we're not trying to erase the architects that came before you. We're trying to preserve them.
Right.
So maybe kind of shift your thinking. I mean, that's fine when you're not in a historic district, but when you are in a historic district, I might recommend looking at it that way.
Right. So with this other project that I have coming forth, I would like to do a preview, and I'd like to get it, maybe I'm too late for the next meeting. So today's the 6th, we need to be in front of you 30 days before with the application, is that correct?
You have to have it submitted to the township by September 19th so it can go in our October agenda.
Oh, okay.
So you
there
have a
we are.
couple weeks yet.
Okay. And I would tell you that this project is called Oak Lane, and I'm going to ask you for a preview of this, depending on how far we are in the design. We may be, quite frankly, that's almost 45 days. We'll be done with the design. So here we are. Again, I'm speaking to your struggles of how do you better this board and this process. I'm going to be presenting, or the architect will be presenting in front of you 45 days from now, a design that's well designed and the owner will be chomping at the bit to get under construction. And I know already that from my experience here, that there may be some questionable design. So the good thing is, I'll be able to share that with the architect, that I don't think that's going to work, and I don't think that's going to work. But I know the architect will say, well, why? Because it's his artistic version of historic architecture. So it'll be very fascinating to see. But I go back to if there's some sort of informal preview, and I don't think anyone's against a fee. I'm not against a fee, providing that it's a reasonable fee.
I think there's just nothing, we're a volunteer board, and there's just nothing written to allow that right now.
Yeah.
So we can absolutely consider that as we put together our, our draft of the new ordinance. But at this point, I mean, feel free to submit. It's September 19th is the date. It is a month from now, approximately Wednesday, October 4th, that we'll be meeting again. So you have plenty of time to get it in and get it started. That will leave you time for comments or changes if necessary. But yeah, just at this point, there is no way to preview or, to get an opinion without going through the formal application process.
What about this? I'm usually here at 5:30 when the doors open from my commute from downtown. Could we do some basic education, say, for example, prior to our meeting? Since the doors open at 5:30, and maybe some of that time can be used just, for basic questions like what we look at, what we don't look at.
I think
example.
that's certainly a comment that I'm going to take forward into the working group about what an education program should look like, who's going to be the one to do the education, who is the customer for the education. There's a lot of logistical details around an education program. Everybody agrees it's important, everybody agrees it's necessary, but nobody really had any comments of what that education program should look like. So I thank you very much for that comment. And,
Well, again, I think-
is it us as a board that does the education? Is the historical district the one that does the education? Is the township going to create some kind of document or put something on the website? We still have to figure out what it's going to look like and what would be acceptable to the commissioners.
Understandable. But as with my former comments on community notification, again, with education, let's start small. Something that we can work with and then build upon, because right now we have lots of disconnects from people who present before us that don't know what we do. So we can start
Are
there.
you suggesting that
basically.
we maybe form a separate committee on this, or is this part of?
No, I
what
think
you'll
it's
work
a part, I'm just giving my comment and input. I think it could be a part of that, sub-working group with Sarah and Miles, because it's already a part of it. It's a basic thing. For me, the number one thing, before was community notification. It looks like, happy to see what's developing there. More after Sarah's report and what is, I would think, transpired over a couple of our last HARB cases, and most in particular with today, I see education becoming the second most important issue, at least in my opinion. But again, I think it's important to start somewhere, start small, and then build upon it.
And of course, Mark, if you want to serve with us, we'll see that you get invited.
Well, I think my last comment is, how do you attract? There's so many ways. The AIA has representation in this community, putting notifications on those publications. Again, maybe not you, but the commissioners.
I think the easiest thing to
staff.
do I certainly understand that an ad in a publication would be a great way to attract an architect, but we are very, very limited as to what we can actually pay for.
Other ideas, Ray's department knows who are builders that may be interested. He speaks to builders on a routine daily basis, not to put more work on Ray's department, but I know Ray would probably be able to, when companies like myself come in for a permit, Slip a little memo in there, by the way, there's an opening in the harbor board. I had no idea there was an opening in the harbor board. Would I personally be interested? Possibly. I need to know what the dynamics are and what the commitment is, which would be great. So what is the commitment? You know, coming to a meeting once a month.
Once a month, and the first Wednesday of every month. We start at 6. And then we usually get our packets by email a few days, and by snail mail also a few days before the meeting. So it's a little more work for me and for Miles Kellum, because we're going to be doing the ordinance update. But for a general person, it's a few hours a month.
Right. So that's just a very simple, again, education is what the responsibilities are. Mainline Builders Association, there's so many different venues that are easy to get the message out. I understand the dynamics of the township. There's only so many things you could do in any given day, but fascinating discussion today for me. Didn't know exactly what I was coming into, but I now know, and I enjoyed it, and I look forward to the next meeting, and I really look forward to your input on the other project, and perhaps that will add a little more input or influence in helping the items that you discussed earlier. So thank you for the time tonight.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second it.
I second.
All those in favor? All 4 of us in favor of that. I'm just going to say that the next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 4th. Same place, same time, 6 o'clock. Applications do need to be in by September 19th. And this meeting is adjourned.